Good evening. It's 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday, July 16th, and I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Finance to order. First item on the agenda, as always, is public comment. Are there any members in the audience that would like to make public comment? Okay. None. We'll move on to our first set of items on the agenda, which are transfers. The first of which is to discuss and possibly take action on a request for a transfer of $25,500 for the preparation of a bid package for improvements at Pear Tree Beach.
So we're using the voting.
Yep.
Good evening.
And congratulations.
You don't know me. Thank you. For the record, I'm Jen Fava, Director of Parks and Recreation. So this went on May 6th, actually. The Board of Selectmen heard a presentation from Chris Flaherty of Redness and Mead and Dan Biggs of Weston and Sampson in relation to the Pear Tree Park Improvement Project. They provided some history of the project and scientific support for the need to address the flooding at the park. One of the important things to remember about this is that a certificate of permission from Connecticut DEP has already been issued, and that was issued in October of 2022. That permit is valid for 5 years, so we're already going into 2 years of that permit, and there are also restrictions of when you can do certain work due to protection for certain shellfish and fish. So even though we have about 3 years, it's really a little bit less than that due to those restrictions. So the scope of this project has evolved over time. Now it's related to the reconstruction of the parking area, the installation of the additional beach area and planting along the edge of the parking lot, reconstruction of the boat ramp, dredging of the channel and the bottom of the boat ramp area, and the restoration of the tidal wetland area. So the Board of Selectmen requested that Weston and Sampson provide a proposal to provide the necessary work to get this project out to bid. So per that request, we did receive that proposal in the amount of $25,500, which is to complete the design development package and take this through permitting with some additional permits that are needed with planning and zoning and also the state. So as was noted on the transfer request form, there are some funds. You'll see that there are some funds that are still available in that project account. However, those funds are allocated for other portions of the project that were outlined in the previous agreement and amendment. Bless you. So we are requesting this funding from the Board of Finance reserve account. Additionally, I just want to note that the Parks and Rec Commission voted as part of their June 12th meeting to support this request, and the Board of Selectmen approved it on July 1st. So I'm happy to take questions, and Lori Bora, our chair of our commission, is here to also help answer any questions that I may not know yet. Be able to answer.
So to be clear, it's almost $46,000 that Weston and Sampson requires to prepare the bid package?
No, they're requesting the $25,500, which is this amount, and then the other money is in there that was from a previous agreement. So that is for the bid process. So they'll be reviewing bids that come in and things like that. So there's other items that are still outstanding out of that initial contract.
Do we expect them to be revising their estimate for that part of the work above the 20-some-odd thousand that's currently available for that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So right now, for that part of the work, not for preparation of the bid package, but what you just articulated was...
Right. That was 21...
Yeah.
20,295 was available.
Right.
In the balance.
Are we confident that they won't be requesting monies above that remaining balance for that remaining work?
I would hope so.
We agree.
I think the money that I think we're transferring, correct me if I'm wrong, is to help prepare the actual documents that we'll put up on our website.
Correct.
That will then allow like sort of partners to kind of come in on bid on. Some of the other dollars were to kind of create the project and some of the engineering in terms of figuring out what needs to get done, to therefore create the documents and put them on the website. So I think there could be some iteration when we get the bids back.
Correct.
There could be some questions, like we've reposted the Great Island entranceway, I think 9 times now, right? Because there's been like slight adjustments to it, so that remaining money would be used, if I'm right, Kate, to kind of help refine any of those throughout the bid process if needed.
I think it was originally intended to be part of the review process of the, when the bids come back, not to refine the bid documents themselves.
So that's the question. So it's $25,000 for them to prepare a bid package.
Yes, right.
Then for them to review the bids and maybe some other sundry items, there's a remaining $21,000 that we've allocated for that. Are we confident that that $21,000 will be sufficient for whatever those other items, including reviewing the bids, might be?
I don't believe we've asked them to revisit that number. So are we confident? No. But I have no reason to say that it's not going to be enough either. I just don't know.
Can you walk me through what the timeline would be if the monies are approved tonight? When would the bid package be ready? You mentioned additional permitting. Does that come after we receive the bids? Sort of tell me how long does the process go to ready to start the project?
They actually didn't give me a specific timeline, but I think they will begin the document creation, because there's going to be drawings, technical drawings and things like that that have to go into that bid document. I believe we're looking at a couple of months to have that actual bid document so that we can get that in line to be put out, as you said, on the website and put out to bid.
Okay, and so you mentioned the deep permit, and we're already lapsed 2 years. We have 3 years remaining. So is that permit good, meaning the project has to be completed within that window, or the project has to be started within that window?
I mean,
Lori's raising her hand. Yeah, come on up.
Hey, Lori, come up here, or I think that microphone is active as
Yeah, both
well.
mics should be working, either way.
Sit here. Lori Bora, Parks and Rec Chair. Previously, Dan had told me to prepare the bid packages about 3 to 6 months. So I think that, I don't have any reason to think that would be any different, but I think based on work he's doing with us elsewhere, I think I wouldn't expect it any sooner than that.
Okay.
He's doing some updated work on Wee Beach for us. So I would say 3 to 6 months. At the end of the 5 years, or as we get close to the end of the 5 years, what we've been told by Dan and Craig is that the town could apply for an extension, but the town would have needed to show good faith that we're starting the process. So we've done nothing. They've said it's very unlikely that CTD would give us an extension. If we're into the process, we're showing, yep, we're working on it, we got delayed, blah, 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 they said the likelihood is greater that they would extend. But we can't have just sat on our hands for 5 years and said, okay, now we'll think about it. We really have to show that we're in progress.
Okay. Maybe expanding on David's point, from a high-level perspective, like the information we had, that John had sent across said that it was originally going to start spring of '24 and that it was a 12-month sort of project. Is the idea that the earliest, does this need to start in the spring, just from a weather or planning or construction perspective?
Well, the trick is, ideally, there's the spring in terms of the planning. You all know that there's a lot of staging in these projects and prep. The goal would be to shovel in the ground after Labor Day and do the work over the winter, so you're not really closing the beach over the summer. So would be try to get all of the pre-work done so that we're ready to go.
And that would
In the
not be
September
this Labor
timeframe.
Day. It
And that would
the
not be this
following
Labor Day.
Labor Day.
It's much too late for
Okay.
that, so
Yeah.
at best.
And is it still expected to take 12 months to complete all this work?
Yeah, and I think that's the planning to the construction and the whole thing, yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
What I thought might just be helpful for our board and maybe just for the public in general, like, I know there's a few different sort of large projects within this bigger project. Would you mind just going through kind of what's actually being done? I know there's some work on the boat ramp, there's parking, there's berms, there's a lot of.
Dredging.
Dredging.
So one piece of this is to elevate again, to alleviate the flooding issue, is to elevate the parking area. Along with that is to also increase the size of the beach on the
West Beach.
west side. Thank you.
West Beach.
So that will be expanded, come back and again, help with the grade and meet the grade of the new parking lot. That'll be higher up. The other part is to redo the boat ramp, because right now it doesn't, between the sediment that's in there, it's not at the right angle, so you can't really launch boats properly. So it will be to rebuild that boat ramp. There's also part of dredging the channel, kind of from the boat ramp and out in that area, so that there's clear water access. And there's also a small area that is a tidal wetland, and it's kind of restoration of that area, also off that west beach.
Not
We-
to bring,
I was going to say, we have a letter from the Coastal Advisory Commission back to 2012 asking the town to rebuild the boat ramp because of it was never built properly, unfortunately. The pitch is just not right, so that if you're trying to get a boat in or out, I know, Dan, you're a boater, I don't know if others are, but if you're trying to get a boat in or out at a lower tide, it's almost impossible because of the pitch of the ramp. And then, I mean, we're not really raising it. It's not like you're going to come off of Pear Tree Point Road and go up a hump or something. It's that the lot is actually not level, and the end closer to the boat ramp is really where it's lower, so it's really raising that part. And again, I think those of you who go to the boat club or whatever, you know what a higher tide now can be a beautiful day, and you can have water that's completely covered the West Beach and is, a car lengths into, I've been to parties down there where like you had to take your shoes off to get back into your car if you were parked along the beach. And if you watch Craig Flaherty's testimony, and it's very, very technical, so I'm not going to try to repeat it, but if you watch it from either the Selectmen's meeting or the December of 2022 meeting, he really gets into the fact that the frequency of the events where there's substantial water in the parking lot are going to significantly increase over the next years. And I don't know, any of you who did the Great Island tour back last, I think it was the very end of October, early November, that day, it was a beautiful day. That was one of those high tide days. By the time the buses came back on the tour I was on around noon, they couldn't get into part of the parking lot because the water was so high. So it's really addressing that, not necessarily, but of course including any major storm events where the water's washing over. And the dunes help absorb the water, and they help keep the sand on the beach and not in the parking lot, which is a cleanup issue for the staff. And we've seen that at Weed Beach, that we've had good luck with the dunes absorbing the action. We don't get a lot of sand into that parking lot. And I know John has asked in the past about the possibility of building a wall instead. Both Craig and Dan have said that's something that CTD would never, it just wouldn't approve, because then the water slams against the walls and back in, and it just creates a lot of wave action in a storm event. So the dunes are considered, they're able to absorb that action and control the flow in and out. But I'm sure you've all seen it at high tides where the West Beach at this point literally will disappear.
there's no modifications to the concession building as part of this project?
The redo of the complete building, no, there just was not the community
And it won't be
demand.
required when the parking lot's raised, or it's not
Nope.
gonna? Okay.
No, we're not. We
No.
just have to be aware that at some point, that building could flood to the point where it's not repairable, but it's held on so far,
So
so.
that building's already at a level where it would not be affected by where they're raising everything around it?
No, that can stay put. And I think we got $50,000 that we spent over the last year, and we did some work to the bathhouse. It looks much nicer. If you haven't been in there, go in and check out the men's room. But it just, we've gotten good community feedback that it looks a little bit better.
And so what does this done, as you look at this project, it goes up to, it basically touches or bumps up against the boat club.
Mm-hmm.
What is being done, is there anything being done at the boat club? That's a property the town owns, correct?
Yes, but it doesn't affect the boat club per se, no. The dredging obviously will impact, you
And it'll
know,
reduce the number of parking spots for the town writ large.
we will reduce,
Including therefore.
yes, there will
for
be
the
some
boat club
reduction in the
members,
number
yes.
of parking spaces based on this plan, which is needed to build out the dunes and the protection. And I know there's been some discussion about that. There's actually more parking spaces at Pear Tree Point Beach than there are at Weed Beach, which is sort of surprising. On the other hand, you know, we do have to accommodate some boat trailers. I don't think on a given weekend there's a ton of boat trailers there. But it's that balancing act.
So, you know, in some of the materials they talked about, I guess the guidelines were to account for 20 inches of sea level rise by 2050. But the baseline, it looks like for the project that they were talking about here was, is it only being designed to kind of, to work up to a 12-inch sea level rise?
I have to go back and double check with Dan or Craig on that.
My recollection, and it's a couple of months ago from watching that presentation at the Board of Selectmen meeting, was that it won't eliminate flooding, but it'll greatly reduce the frequency of flooding. So
That's
instead of
right,
it,
yes.
in 50 years, instead of it flooding 50% of the month days, it'll be 5% of the month, something like that.
Right.
So in terms of, you know, in some of the other bigger projects, whether it's the school or Great Island or so forth, I think we've realized that the time in which we ask people, because the bid documents will request that they start at a certain time, right? Like, have we looked into the time that we're asking for this project to start, or the time frame, or whether the beach needs to be open, to see like how that's going to affect? Because I think we saw that timing and whether you need to keep something open on Great Island can really affect the prices and people's willingness to bid.
No, we have not gotten that far. No, I mean, really, this is laid largely dormant since we got the approval. The next step is, you know, Kate, we worked with you and Monica and had Dan Biggs prepare an estimate of probable cost.
Yes.
Is that the right term?
Yes.
That was when the 6.6 million came back, but then it just really didn't
And so
progress.
who prepared that and when was that?
Dan Biggs prepared that,
It was
year
about a year ago.
and a half ago, was when Monica was still first
Okay,
selectman.
so we've had some unfortunate experience with HHR where we have estimates and then they're wildly off, or materially off.
Yep.
So, is there any recent conversation with Dan, or,
We've not asked him to update that number
so
now.
the 6.7 could be good, it could be,
Well, considering.
it's not gonna be,
the-
it's not gonna be low.
It's not
It's
going to be
not
lower.
gonna
I mean, it's not, yeah, no.
The first numbers that we had been hearing were only a couple million, which is,
I mean, it's not
gave us
gonna be
pause that we didn't think
Way
that
back.
would really be sufficient. So we asked for that estimate of probable cost, and that's when we got the much higher. One of the things that will impact that number greatly is the soil that has to be removed from the sound when they go to do that dredging. Depending on what's in that soil, if it's clean enough, it'll be cheap. If it's not clean, that will drive the costs up, because we'd have to treat it specially and get it off. So what we really can't do until we actually put it out to bid and get a number, we can't sit here and tell you we want to move forward with it.
Is the plan when you, just because some of these projects I think are a little bit independent of each other, like to do the parking lot, you don't have to dredge, right? So are you going to ask for bids on sort of a separate pieces of the project, or is there going to be one single bid for all items?
I think it would be short-sighted to try and break it up, especially considering that we have a limited time. And the opinion of both Dan Biggs and Craig was that it was amazing that Deep gave us these permissions, that they were really surprised, and I think we've got them, and we should do the most work we can to that beach to preserve it for as long as possible. So, you know, could you do the boat ramp without dredging? I don't think that makes sense. But to do the boat ramp, you need to do the parking lot.
I guess the
And
pitch. go up.
if you don't want the parking lot to keep flooding, you do need to have those dunes and the wetlands restoration.
But I guess my question, just from a, we have a lot of sort of capital items
Yeah,
coming
we do.
before us in terms of sewer drainage and other things, like, I think it feels like it could be helpful to know if all of a sudden the dredging has skyrocketed because the amount of material that needs to be decontaminated.
Jim, I think, ask me if the Yankees are gonna go to the World Series next year. That might be an easier question than to know this. I think we need to get the bid documents, we need to put it out to bid, we need to see what we're dealing with before you start,
I guess I was just more saying, when we put it out the bid, are we gonna ask them to bid?
well, it'll be
Different
broken,
pieces of it, or just one?
segments. We will, I believe we will be able to identify what is what piece of the project.
Okay.
Will you be able to identify what's the variables in there? Does that, like, if the soil's gonna drive, if the potential variance in the thing is $1 to $4 million, let's just say, we'll be able to identify that?
Yeah,
The
you'll be able to
variability in
identify
each piece?
what piece is for this, for the dredging, what
Right.
piece is for the soil remediation if necessary. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
dredging
I think-
approval goes from the ramp up around, I don't know the dock, if it's the B or the C.
D-dock.
Okay, but it goes up around those
And then-
docks that are closest to Pear Tree Point
C.
Road and around, because the boat club asked us to include that in the bid. I mean, in theory, to complete the ramp, you could just dredge a little bit in front of the
Right.
ramp, and that could complete the parks project. But then the boaters, would get in and then possibly at
Yeah, at low
certain tides
tide,
hit.
that water
hit
right
some
there is
shallow
about
spots.
2 feet.
Right, and-
So launching a boat into that would be very difficult.
Right, so from a cost efficiency, it probably makes more sense for the town if you're gonna get the equipment in there and do dredging to be doing it all at once. And then I believe that has the permit application gone in for dredging of
They're
the
working on
channel?
that.
That's
They're
being
working
worked on as
on
well.
That's a separate project.
Separate project.
But we might try and time them together
Yeah,
and,
have the dredging.
and require involvement of the other parties that would benefit from it, financially.
You know what might be helpful is when the bid comes back and you break out the components, like the boat ramp is this much, the dredging is that much, you'll have that broken out for us, I know. If someone could give us some way to estimate, say, if 10% of the soil comes back contaminated, it affects the price this much.
Okay, yeah.
If 25% of
Yeah.
the soil comes back contaminated, it affects the price that
Yeah.
much, right? At least some way to measure the potential variation, because
Yeah.
we're not gonna be able to know about the soil until they start to dig it up, right?
Well, they're gonna have to go in and test it before they start to do the real dredging, so that they will know before they dig it up and dump it
Yeah.
somewhere,
Duh.
what has to be done.
Because they need
That's
to
gotta
know
be-
where they can dump it.
We gotta put that in as part of, before we approve anything, right? Because I think, I'll say this, I'm not gonna say this for the board, but, we kind of got burned with the schools, right? It went from 80 million to 105, and my take on it was 70% was done on certain schools, right? We did this, but we didn't do the floors. We did the windows, but we didn't do this. I want some variability in here, right? I want to understand what is gonna maybe drive this. There's a 0% chance this is gonna be at 6.6. 0, if this was done a year and a half ago, right? So is this become 9, 15, or 20? That's the way I kind of look at it. And I just want, what he just talked about, the variability that I talked about, I want to be able to see that. But if the biggest driver to this variability is gonna be the soil, somebody's got to do that ahead of time. Like, I don't want to be sitting here with a $14 million bid and we haven't looked at the soil.
I would expect that will, before we ever come to you for money to do the project, that will have happened.
Okay,
Yeah, we're gonna wanna know that because it's a huge variable.
yeah.
It's a huge variable.
Maybe the long way around saying it, that's
Yeah.
what I want to say.
Yeah, no, we understand it's a huge
I would think
variable.
most of the board
Yeah,
would say that.
I agree. I think when this comes in front of us, it would be very helpful for my decision as to approve or not, is if we saw,
Yeah.
if people had to submit different bids and we knew kind of what each of the projects, which are somewhat independent of each other, to know what the separate ones cost.
Yeah. And it's a tricky issue because we're a boating community. That's the one access point for, many people to get their boats You know, many, I believe, Dan, you told me that many of the boat club members, you know, that's how they get their boats in and out, you know, at the beginning of the season.
I don't know.
Is that
I think
true?
most boat club members store their boats at the boat club, either on a mooring
Okay.
or on a slip. I don't know what percentage of boat club members, or just residents, you don't need to be a boat club member
Yeah.
to launch your boat.
Launch their boats there,
So,
yeah.
I don't have that information.
Yeah.
I'm sure the town has that information. I would think the town has.
Well,
I
we
don't
may
know.
or-
I don't
we
know.
may or
No
may
one's
not
really
be-
monitoring what boats are launched, right?
There's a boat tax, so they'd have to know how many people in town had boats, but that doesn't tell us where they keep them.
Correct.
But isn't,
We
to
don't-
launch a boat, isn't the only thing you need is a boat and a parking sticker that allows you to get into the Pear Tree Point?
No, there's a
No,
separate
there's a boat
boat
sticker.
launch sticker, but what we learned during the pandemic is that most people launch their boat early to mid-May, and they pull it sometime in October. But we only have a gate guard at Pear Tree from Memorial Day to Labor Day. So while people technically should have a boat sticker to do that, there's just no enforcement.
So let me clarify
And we
what I
learned it
said
during the
earlier.
pandemic, because remember, we closed the beaches completely to vehicular traffic, and then people were coming, but I need to launch my boat, so we made a special arrangements with the boat club, if I recall properly, to have days and slots where all the boat club members could come in and launch, and we're like, but by the way, you guys need to buy your stickers.
What I was talking about was the daily boat launch traffic, not the seasonal launch.
It's not very heavy.
It's not very heavy.
It's not very heavy, yeah,
I
because
would
somebody
think
like
the
can buy a
majority
day
of the
sticker.
boats at the boat club are launched at that ramp.
And then stay.
In May, and then brought
Yes.
back up in
Yes.
October.
Yes.
Yes.
Which, so
Yes.
I think in connection with the overall cost of this, it's why I think it'd be helpful to know, because if you're dredging 1 foot, then that means you're effectively adding an extra hour and a half per 12-hour tide cycle that you're allowed to do it. So I
Yeah.
think just, the more separation and detail you have on the project, I think would be good.
Yep.
Where is the soil dumped?
It all depends.
It all depends. There is still, I believe, one place in Long Island Sound, a sort of a dumping area, but the soil has to be clean. If it's not clean and approved for that, then it has to be put onto the parking lot or somewhere, dewatered, dried out, and then trucked to, Dan always seems to bring Pennsylvania up for some reason, but,
Yeah.
and that's what really drives the cost.
So when was the last time we dredged that? We've dredged that. I mean, there's a longtime resident in town that told me,
Been a
like,
long
20
time.
years ago, this was dredged and the soil was so clean,
Yeah.
we could only put it in some certain places, et cetera. So I'm not suggesting that's what we'll find now, because a lot has changed in the last.
Well, some testing
but-
was done, and there were pockets that we found that the soil wasn't going to qualify for disposal within Long Island Sound.
Okay. When was that?
Gosh, it's gotta be 2.5, 3 years ago now
Okay,
at this point.
so we're
when
expecting
we were working
some-
through this
we would
before we
expect-
applied to CT Deep, and that was or was during that application process, so probably in the 2021
So we would
timeframe.
expect some of the soil to not qualify for long. Okay, so back to your point, we could have, yeah, all right.
It wasn't way over the threshold, but in certain spots, it was in fact over the threshold. And, yeah, because that was going on during the pandemic. We were doing the testing and everything, and working our way through the application project. So that's 24, so yeah, it's been 2.5, 3 years at this point.
Well, I think the board will have a lot of questions. I think the biggest question is going to be, what does this cost? And it sounds like we need this 25,000 in order to provide
To get there.
get the documents up.
Does anybody know, do we have an obligation to maintain a navigable waterway? Is that an obligation that the town has or anything like that with
No.
respect to that waterway?
To my knowledge, we do not.
I
We
don't
do
think
not.
so, but
Okay. All right.
like I said, it gets us back to being a
But I
coastal.
think that's becomes part, it's, no legal obligation, but what is your obligation as stewards of the town?
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I appreciate it. Any other questions, Paul, David? Okay. Well, thank you. And Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
You voting on it or no?
Yeah, you guys.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I will, I'll look for a motion to, hold on a second. Look for a motion to approve a request of to transfer $25,500 from the Board of Finance's Capital Reserve Fund to the Pear Tree bid package
So moved.
for site work. Paul moves, Rob seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item, number 2 here, is discuss and take action on a request to transfer $5,000 allocated to the purchase of flags from Beautification to the Board of Finance contingency, right?
Right. In the fiscal '25 budget process, the Beautification Committee had requested $5,000 for purchasing new flags for downtown. It was removed at an earlier level. Board of Finance put it back in, but in that time, they've now gotten flags donated, so they no longer need the money. So we are looking to move that money out of the beautification budget and over to contingency in case there's a need for it somewhere else.
Great. Accept the motion to make that transfer. Rob moves. Dave seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. And thank you to all those that donated to make that transfer possible.
Who did donate?
I don't know.
My understanding was the people who had donated the flags originally about 5 to 6 years ago.
Awesome.
Do we reuse them for the
They were out there for quite a while, and the reason they wanted new ones was the original ones got kind of
Yeah, they were
crap,
beyond.
worn, and they had to take them down.
Awesome. Well, thank you to those that supported us. Next is review and approve the fiscal year 2025 operating budget for Great Island. If you guys remember, as part of the budget, we approved about $200,000 to out of the general fund to be put into the special fund, and so now we're approving the overall budget of what will be spent out of that fund. Kate?
Here, if you have any questions.
My first question would be, the very first line of the revenue for building rent, in the proposed budget, it's 175, but it says with the terminations, we're anticipating it being 150.
Yes.
Doesn't that put us at a $25,000 deficit out of the box?
Not necessarily. We also would expect that the electricity, potable water, heating fuel will all go down as a result,
So
with the buildings being vacant.
the town as the landlord is paying for heat and electric
Yes.
and water for those units.
Those were the leases we inherited.
Hey, how many units do we have?
Okay, yeah, that's
How
fine.
many units do we have?
Let's see, there was one apartment being rented in the stables. There's the White House, there's the greenhouse, the pink house, and then there's the 2 apartments on either side of the mansion, the Dolphin House and the Village.
Soon to be
Yeah.
3.
That's 6 then?
3, well, it's on the schedule.
Yeah, if
In
you
the
look down the
package.
bottom.
Yeah.
It's 5 now, 3.
Thank you.
18 is the pink house, 24 is,
We got 5.
can't remember which one 24 is. Oh, that's the Dolphin House. 46 was the apartment of the stables, 40 is the White House, and then 49 is the greenhouse.
And what is the plan for all of these houses? I
The
mean-
leases all terminate next July,
Okay.
and as for the plan for them, that's to be determined by the Great Island Advisory Committee and
TBD.
TBD.
But just to be clear, all these people that have moved out and these other folks that have let us know they're moving out in a few months, we're not actively advertising for new people to rent
No.
those, right?
No, the reason when we renewed the leases last year, we renewed them through July of '25, considering that we felt it would take at least a year to get the master plan created, that it would be due to be created and kind of accepted in about July of '25. So at that point, we felt that we'd probably want them vacated.
You know, to Dave's question, are there any other utilities that we pay for as the landlord here besides the electricity? Like, do we pay for heating, fuel, and?
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a few lines down from that.
Heating, fuel, water, pretty much all of it, sounds like. There
And then
has,
repairs and things like that, as you might expect. Something goes wrong with the boiler, we've had those kind of things.
I think we had some flooding right, on one of the,
In
or
one of them,
leak?
yes, yes. So I would expect some of the other things, like snow removal last year, we had very low cost, so I think our estimate is high. The landscaping contract, we've assumed an increase. Don't know, if we've overshot that or not. Trees, that's all depending on what.
The snow removal is a third party?
Yes, it is.
Can we get an estimate?
What about using, what
Oh,
about?
sorry.
I was just- I was-
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, because 40,000, when I first saw it, I thought, $40,000 for snow removal, that sure sounds like a lot, right? With so few residents on the island. And then I thought, well, geez, it's not like if you're just making it passable, couldn't we have the DPW guys, clear a path? Because there aren't going to be very many residents on the island,
Right, but they already have a full schedule when there's a snowstorm. So, and we do use outside services to clear some of our, like the parking lots. So this goes along with that. I don't think it really would fit into the workload without hiring additional personnel. So.
And for the 40, are we plowing like all of the roadways?
Well, we have to plow the loop. And we have to make the homes accessible. Now that with
Do we have to
people
plow the
moving
whole-
out, we're not gonna have to plow up to their houses now.
Well, I'm not that familiar with the geography, but do we have to plow the whole loop? I mean,
Well,
with
it's,
the
it's,
layout,
as,
with the
as the
lay-
road is now, it's basically a one-way road. It's not wide enough for two cars to pass. So, we will look to economize in any way we can. I think our budget estimates, may be high in several categories, but,
Well, no, honestly, I was just thinking, it may be a one-way loop, but when you're down to 5 residents in a snowstorm, it's not like people are gonna be driving onto the island then,
That's
right?
true.
The traffic is only one way and it's all gonna be
All right,
out. So if there's only one side of the island that
Yeah.
was plowed, it seems like it would make sense.
What I'd like to see is, let's assume there's nobody renting on the island.
yep,
So we lose all we lose all the revenue.
yep.
What changes to our costs?
Okay.
So we need to maintain it for public access while the master plan is being developed. There's no one living there. What does this account look like? So that's going to be the annual transfer until there's a planet being actually operated, right? There's going to be nobody living there. We're going to be maintaining it, but we don't have any utilities. We don't have these utilities, et cetera. So what is our run rate
Okay,
burden to maintain this with no rentals?
with no rentals, yeah, okay. And just the public access as is now.
Correct, thank you.
Okay.
And there had been talk about some film revenue.
Yes.
We don't have that in the budget?
No, we don't. Honestly, we didn't know, and we still don't. We've made some money off of the filming that took place there this summer, but we don't know what our possibilities are for that.
I think that revenue was relatively light, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't tens,
No.
it was singles.
But we also don't know what kind of opportunities, it has to fit somebody's need to want to go there. And it also has to fit our needs, because if they wanted to come down and shut down the entire island for a week, are we going to actually agree to that? So I think that was too big of an unknown to project this.
David, and folks, just because we're on the topic, this Monday coming up, the Great Island Advisory Committee has its first meeting with the folks that we hired to sort of help us plan out the vision and the master plan. So I think things will probably start rolling and moving with that first meeting.
And, and understand that operating transfer won't happen until the end of the year, till we know what we actually need.
And it's just gonna be based on what's actually.
So that's just a holding,
Yeah.
that number is
That's a
a
plug.
budget number, that's just a plug.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
cool, yeah.
We typically don't like to say that as accountants, but that's what it is.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Well, I think,
Fair
I can tell you guys affirmatively from my position sitting on the GIAC, getting regular updates from Tony and Ed, I think these guys have been very, very sort of careful with money that they're spending, doing only what's necessary on items that we might not be using or might not be changing, and like fencing, if it's going to be temporarily, I think they've gone for like the lower cost. I know that the two of them always have costs on their mind related to these things before the ultimate long-term plan is. So I know these are all estimates, but if Kate, if you would agree, I think they're very good about
They
it.
absolutely are.
Yeah.
So the request is to what, a budget $400,000 for the?
Yeah, to approve, so there's a special revenue fund that's been created. We've sort of, through the appropriation of the leases, we've said all the lease revenue and so forth goes into that fund. We approved about $225,000 from the general fund to be spent as like a grant or a deposit into that fund. This now says they can spend up to $400,000 out of that fund, the same way that we approve in the Parks and Rec special fund, where they can spend like X hundreds of thousands of dollars out of that
Okay,
fund.
so I want to be a little bit careful here, because I don't want to write a blank check for $400,000 if we have, our costs go down. I don't want, let's say our costs go down to 200,000, because the island's empty and our operating costs have gone down to 200. What I don't want to do is just give the fund an extra $200,000 to do with it as whoever would govern that.
I believe you
sees
get
fit.
monthly reports from Jen telling you what's being spent on that, so you can keep an eye on it and keep us honest and.
Yeah, it's in the monthly financial report, that fund. And because it is a special revenue fund for management of Great Island, the funds can only be used for maintenance.
Right. We can't
roads,
undertake
that
any
kind of
capital
thing.
projects.
We can't do anything capital out of it.
Okay.
And the way it would work is, if the costs go down and we don't have to spend on electricity or whatever else, it won't be spent. And-
So, but then the fund will be left with a balance,
Correct.
which
And-
will not be able to be returned to the town.
No, there's
No.
mechanisms.
Oh, it can be?
Yeah, there's mechanisms.
Okay, yeah,
If we close
okay.
out the fund, there's
And
a
we close out the
mechanism to
fund
pull
and
it back.
return- okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you.
Is this similar like the Parks and Rec fund? They can only use those expenses for kind of like programming related expenses,
Right.
correct? And at the end of the year, when there generally always is a surplus, we flush that back
get
in.
that. Okay.
And that,
Right, we don't
That's
have
what I
that
wanna
same
clarify.
setup with this fund. As of the end of fiscal '24, we have about a $200,000 fund balance. And what we would do in fiscal '25 is if we find that everybody moves out in August, there's no rental revenue, but we still have ongoing expenses for mowing the lawn, maintaining the property, that sort of thing, we can draw off the fund balance. And then at the end of the year, we see if that wasn't enough to cover it, then we come to the general fund and pull from there.
Or if we find that we've overfunded it,
We can transfer
if
back.
we choose, depending on the timing of the progress of the GA, whatever it is.
Right, because what comes out of that,
GIAC.
we may or may not want to continue using this fund.
Correct, okay.
so while
All right.
there's
All
going to
right.
be 400,000 in there.
No, there's not.
There's an appropriation.
So there's an appropriation for that amount, and then there's a balance left over from last year, which is greater than 400,000, but they can only spend 400,000 out of the fund.
Well, a special revenue fund, you can spend more than that if you have fund balance or revenues to support it. But the limiting factor is that you can only spend for that purpose.
For the purpose is what limits it.
Right. Like the sewer fund, they can go over budget and draw down fund balance without having to come back for an appropriation because it is for a specific purpose.
Okay.
But
And
we
it's to
don't
maintain
anticipate.
the island for pedestrian access.
Yes.
Essentially.
Right, and we don't
Okay.
anticipate it being more than 400.
I honestly think it's gonna come in less.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting at. It's likely to be less.
Yes.
So what happens with that overage? or
Basically what
surplus?
happens is we don't have to take in the full 255
Right.
from the general fund.
And if we are confident that it's a permanent surplus, we can return it.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to get.
Okay.
Okay.
So any other questions on the operating budget? And I guess just because this is line items, these are just estimates. If you would need to transfer from electricity to security, you don't need to come back to us?
No.
Okay. And does it need to go to the Board of Selectmen?
No, because it's a special revenue fund. We can move it around.
And actually, I mean, we would probably just let the budgets go over if we needed 30,000 in electricity, but we thought 25. We would just let it go because as long as the fund as a whole is okay, it has slightly different rules than the general
Okay.
fund.
Well, any other questions?
No.
Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the fiscal year 2025 operating budget for the Great Island Fund, Great Island Special Revenue Fund. Jen?
Of how much?
Of $400,000. Rob moves. Dan seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Kate, thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate.
Good night.
If you want to buy a plow with me. 0 is the answer to your question. Probability of the Yankees winning the World Series.
Okay, financial report.
What you have in front of you is what we have posted through fiscal year =24. We're still posting back in July for final invoices. Our final check run of fiscal '24 will be the last week of July. We're truing up investment income, property taxes, and the revenue that runs through the online permitting and P&Z application system. So those will get trued up in July. But overall, oh, and Board of Ed is a big reconciliation that we do in July. Overall, we're in really great shape. No big surprises on the expenditure side. We do expect some surpluses there. And then on the revenue side, property taxes are consistent with collections in prior years. Investment income we expect will be around 4.9 million, which is more than 2 million better than budget. And then we've had some other revenue surpluses in intergovernmental revenue, even our other taxes, which is prior year fees and interest. And town clerks, we've got a little bit of a surplus. And then building permits, we have a small surplus right now, but we do expect that to grow probably about 160 to 200,000 once we reconcile in July. So the general fund is looking very healthy.
Jen, you said building permits are going to be 150 to 200 more than the number here?
Yes.
Wow. 'Cause I was going to say spot on, man, building permits, but you just blew that.
Town clerk is spot on. That one is all
Yeah.
tied out.
Man,
and
nice job.
That one was spot on. In terms of contingency and such, where we're ending up on page 5, we still have about $127,000 in our general contingency. As the departments close out their budgets and we bring you transfers in August, we may hit that to some extent for something like accrued leave. We have our final 1 week of June that I'm working on the payroll because we just paid it on Friday. We have to accrue that back. So there were a couple of people that retired and had accrued benefits payouts. I expect we'll use some of the contingency for that, but they weren't police, so they weren't enormous payouts.
While we're on 5, unassigned fund balance?
Yeah, I'm getting, I
At some
know
point.
you want to see the Moody's
Yeah,
way
like
of doing it.
Moody's guidance.
Yeah.
You know,
I
deficit
ran
surplus to
short on
Moody's
time
guidance.
and
But
didn't get that
Yeah,
in
no,
there,
no,
but
yeah, just want to make sure.
I did
it's
have a
not-
note and I wanted to point that out before
It's
you
just,
picked
you're
up on
just
it.
closing the books last month, that's all, come on.
And I had to do payroll last week. But, so that will be on a future one, I promise.
Thank you.
But overall, our contingencies look good. The capital reserve is at about 191,000, and that's accounting for the 25.5 you just approved. But August, September time, we'll be bringing through the capital closeouts, so we expect that to go up a little bit with people closing out capital projects.
So, just so I understand what Dan is asking for, is that you're gonna show the amount of reserve in excess of the new Moody's calculation?
Not in excess of, but using the Moody's calculation with everything that's going on, how does it translate to the Moody's calculation? So we'll have our number, so we can compare it against our policy, and we'll have the Moody's number, so we can compare it against.
But I guess-
their
And
way
that's
of
not
looking
a
at it.
policy, that's just like a note.
No,
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't want,
understand.
I'm not suggesting we adopt that as a policy. I just want to know how we stand relative to that guidance.
Right, so if their guidance is 40% for a AAA, we want to know, are we near 40%?
Exactly.
Right,
That's
all right, yeah. So I guess I'm still on the idea of, can we find a way to present, can we find a way to show, because right now we're showing, in excess of our 12% minimum, and it looks like the town has $10 million in excess funds, right? So what I'd like to find a better way to reflect, how much is in excess of our targeted operating level, if you will. I mean, we have informally adopted the 15%, I guess. So, to sort of show as a way for, because it feels like every year when we roll into the budget, we're kind of like deciding each year differently how much money we have available to use
So
out of the general
you're
fund.
kind of reading ahead in class, because under agenda
business.
review, one thing that I wanted to put out on there, because we've talked about it, we've kind of danced around it a little bit, is revisiting our fund balance policy, revisiting the way we determine what that target is based on what our needs are. So I
You
think,
stole all the
I think
excitement.
once we set that, then we can recast how it's shown on
Yeah,
here.
perfect.
I retract all my prior comments.
No, they're good comments, good comments.
We're all on the same page and
Yeah.
looking at it the same way, I think. On pages 6, 7, and 8, you have the
Hey,
other
Jen,
funds.
Sorry, one quick thing. On the unassigned fund balance, how much fluidity is on some of these numbers, did you say? Are they almost final, like, Board of
These-
Education came down pretty. I thought they
Yeah,
were
these
running- I
are,
think they were running like
I haven't
-600.
updated these since we did our projection for the budget in early April.
Okay.
I've
That's
just
fine.
carried those, but in August, we'll have a much better,
We'll have it
cleaner.
close. Yep, okay, cool, thank you.
I don't think, Board of Ed came down, I think some of our revenues went up a little bit, but overall, I don't think there's gonna be wild swings.
Cool.
So 6, 7, and 8 are our other funds. The sewer fund, as of right now, is gonna be adding almost $200,000 to its fund balance. That's just under 2.2 million. That's good because if we have a large capital need, we can transfer that over to the capital fund, and cover large capital needs that way. Parking fund bounced back really well this year. So we're gonna have, so I take that back. Sewer fund, because we haven't done the year-end transfer, that's about 250, they're gonna end up about even, but they do have about a $2.2 million fund balance. The parking fund, they're gonna be close to a $400,000 addition to fund balance, which is good because we did draw it down in the last couple of years because we had a reduction in tickets and daily parking.
Jen, when Ed finally gets around to doing the walkway from the post 53 lot down, can the parking fund pay for that?
No, he, unless he's already budgeted in the parking capital, I can't remember, but it's very specific on what is and isn't ours, so he's very careful to make sure that it only gets budgeted in the right places.
Okay, all right.
And I think that one is not ours, but if it is ours, he's already put it in parking capital.
Yeah, I thought part of that path was gonna be on state property and part,
Yeah, I defer to Ed on knowing which bucket it has to come out of. He's very good at that.
I'm confident it will be correct.
Yes. And then on page 8, we have the rec program fund, which is designed to zero out at the end of the year. We did assume a $280,000 transfer back to the general fund, and probably by the time we finish processing invoices, that'll be pretty close. And then the last one on page 8 is the Great Island Management Fund. We did start this a little bit. We got like 1 month of revenue in fiscal '23. So what these are life-to-date numbers for that whole fund. So to date, we've taken in just under $600,000 in income, and we've spent just under $400,000 on maintenance expenses.
So we're running a $200 million.
200,000.
200,000. I'll take 200 million.
pay for the
It's
items,
all a matter of the decimal point.
Very true.
buy another one.
Active bonded capital projects, there's really nothing exciting here.
We're close to closing Oxbridge out, is that right? Like months?
I hope so. I don't know, given that we just got the final state closeout on the shuffle from like
Oh, yeah,
2016.
yeah, okay,
Doesn't-
all
I
right.
don't know when we can say officially closed out, but
Fair
I
enough,
think we
fair
do
enough.
expect
Yeah,
that
they
within
have
the
a-
next few months,
they have
our
a look back.
expenditures will be done.
Yeah,
I
okay.
don't know, I drove by Oxford today, it looks like there are construction flags on the top of the building, so I'm not sure what's going on down there.
Yeah, there is work being done on the roof. I'm not quite sure what it is either, but,
But Hinley Homes and Royal, we're starting to see some uptick in expenditures on there. There's definitely more invoices coming through, so those are getting up and running. The other ones, you know, we're making a little progress on sidewalk rehab. Ed kind of has that scheduled out. And then on Hanson Road Bridge, a little bit of expenditure, but not the real big expenses yet.
DHS track, just being the last one, I thought that's.
That is done, it can come off. Yep. They fully expended exactly what their budget was, what we borrowed, so nothing to formally close on that, and we'll take that off the next month.
This showed like 2,000, or is that just, I mean, not that that's material, but.
Yeah, I guess actually we will have to rescind $2,000 worth of appropriation. That was for issuance costs that we didn't need because we got a premium.
When do bids go out on the Hanson Road project? Is
That
it-
I don't know, but I can find
I was
out.
told by someone at the site September, so it's still gonna be a ways away before that work is done.
Yeah.
Because I actually thought it would be done this summer, but that was incorrect.
Let me find out for you.
Are we anticipating a state grant there? So I see a little.
It's possible, but it would be on a reimbursement basis, so we do have to do all of the work and
So that-
outlay all the costs up front, and then we'll submit, and if we do, that's why we're gonna hold off on borrowing the big amount for them, to see if we do get any grant. I think it was up to about 50% of the construction cost.
no?
That's when.
Pages 14, 15, and 16 give you detail
August
on
8th.
that
Access.
$6
says
million
Great
that
Island
we
Access.
borrowed as notes for Great Island acquisition. We've spent about another 27,000 from May to July. The real detail is on page 16, where Ed shows you what he's got for estimates. And the big one is the road widening and remediation. Those are still unknowns and have the potential to be a few $1 million between the two of them.
Those bids, I saw were pushed back to like second week of August.
I don't know, but if that's what you saw, I assume that's what they are.
this is great detail, thank you.
And then finally, on page 17, we have the ARPA grant. We made some good progress. We spent about $400,000 in the period from middle of May to middle of July. We have another 1.4 million encumbered. We have 1.2 million unobligated. Next week, Kate and I are meeting to discuss reallocation of funds, or if projects seem to be that they'll take longer, we're gonna look for items maybe in the capital budget and see if we can swap some things. Find items that'll be quicker, easier to do through ARPA, and these ones that are languishing because they've run into complications, we'll swap them over to the capital budget.
And that's gotta be done by the 12/31.
12/31, the
right?
funds have to be obligated,
Okay.
so contracts,
Yeah.
you know, it already has to be bid and contracted.
Not just identified, but other.
Right,
Yep.
and that is it for the financial report.
Questions? Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
Next is we have review and approve minutes for May 21st and June 10th, both of which were special meetings. No comments from the chair.
I did notice on the May 21, the heading says regular meeting, so I'll update that to special.
I don't have any comments.
Okay, I'll accept the motion to approve the minutes of May 21, 2024, modified to have the title say special meeting.
Mhm.
Dave moves. Rob seconds. All those in favor? Any noes?
Abstain.
And one abstention, so 4-0-1. Accept a motion to approve the minutes for June 10th, 2024 special meeting. Dan moves. Dave seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous, 5-0. Okay, special assignments, committee reports. Rob?
Dispatch, we've met twice, exchanged proposals, meeting again tomorrow. Can't make tomorrow's, will be on the next one, and I'll give the board a better update in August. I don't have anything on audit committee,
No,
right, which is,
we're just getting underway.
yep.
They will be on site for preliminary work tomorrow and Thursday, and I think over at the Board of Ed on Friday.
And when do you expect field work to be done? Like, is it the end of August?
Final field work is usually this first or second week of September.
September?
They've tried to push us into August, and that's just too soon.
They're trying to fit you in there. Yeah.
They know that we're good and that we are in
They're
good
trying
shape
to
by
put
August.
resources
but-
somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's my tip.
David, anything on HHR?
Construction has begun at all three schools. It is way too early to really have much to report. We're actually having our first monthly progress meeting next week, but there have been regular weekly owners, architect, construction manager meetings ongoing. So far, the initial early signs are good, and that no material issues have arisen. There have been no requests for potential change orders or anything like that. And ONG says they are on track to be out of the buildings by August 17th when the teachers return. There have apparently been a couple of complaints about things like noise, traffic, and dust. There's more traffic than I expected, those kinds of things. Those issues have been dealt with by the on-site manager at each school location, but we would certainly encourage the public. If you have a concern or an issue, you can either talk to the folks in the trailer from ONG at each site, or bring it up to us, and we'll be glad to make sure it gets taken care of.
The only thing to report on is for the Great Island Advisory Committee, our meeting was moved to Monday night, and that'll be when we first meet with Reed Hildebrand, who's the consultant that the committee selected and the Board of Selectmen approved to come in and provide the vision and the great plan. And so I think, certainly keep you guys up to date. That'll kind of kick off the process of what will eventually be a schedule of meetings with the public and more information sessions and so forth. So.
Open, that meeting, or?
Yep.
Here?
Yep. It will be, I think it'll be both virtual and in person, and I believe it's being held in this room.
Okay.
I'll just keep this idea on the table that, as we go forward with Great Island, we just talked about Pear Tree, and we don't know where that number's coming in, and I think there's still a project kicking around at Weed. So the board collectively will need to think about how we're going to determine or decide on allocation of resources amongst areas that are very similar, right?
Had a pension fund meeting this afternoon. For the second quarter, performance was just slightly below what we expected, but within the past couple weeks, they thought they'd made that back up. So we're still pretty much 100% funded for the two primary pension funds.
Oh, I'm sorry, off the top of your head, do you know what our year-to-date returns are?
No, I can
Ball.
send you the report.
That'd be great, thank you. I got nothing.
Okay. So in terms of Chairman's report, nothing really new, but I think, so let's just kind of move into, I guess, no new business, but on the agenda review, sorry, does anyone have new business? Okay, so on the agenda review, Jen and I spoke, and I think there were 3 sort of topics I'd like to kind of kick off in our August meeting, and then, have some preliminary decisions maybe made in our September meeting. One would be around fund balance. I think, Jen and I talked a bit about creating a report that shows historically going back the last few years and kind of where we close things out at the end of, on June 30th with respect to this budget and funding the fiscal 25 budget, to look at what was the fund balance, and I think to David's point, what was that fund balance incorporated all the other liquidity? What did that show for the quote Moody's calculation, right? And we'll look at what that would mean for a AAA, for a AA, for a single A, and I think it would be good to look at that versus our other liquidity, which is like a percent of, I guess, fund revenues, or I think we sometimes shortcut and say expenditures out of the fund. But for both of them, look back on what those numbers are, and I think on our traditional liquidity policy, which I think we could probably improve the way at least we communicated to the Republic around the 12% minimum. Kind of what is the minimum? I think a minimum we had described as that was a level by which if it hit that or went below that, we would affirmatively look to grow the fund, and then where our target is. And so I think what would probably be good for both of these calculations, if we want to have sort of a guideline or a policy on both of these, is to look at the information. Jen, if you could put that together along with maybe brush off the cobwebs on what the rating agencies' views are. I think it'd be good to have going into our budget cycle and maybe think about discussing it in August and voting on something in September in terms of where we want to.
I think that might be a little ambitious. I think we'll definitely get it done in the coming months, but there is one other component to it. I don't think, what we haven't included in the past is some assessment of what are potential draws from our fund balance. First one that comes to mind is natural disaster. If we have some major storm, say Sandy, that does a lot of damage, we have to draw cash-wise from the fund balance until we get FEMA reimbursement. And I think we need to think if there's anything else that could be a potential draw on it, not because we're using it for something or some unexpected budgetary thing, Board of Ed needs money, town needs money, or some unplanned purchase, something that came up. But I want to make sure that we factor in the potential need to draw on that for cash purposes for some length of time.
Does the Municipal Government Association provide guidance on how to determine that kind of a?
They do. So GFOA came up with kind of like the new fund balance approach, and I think they actually put a template out there that was a spreadsheet to at least, because it's different depending on where you are in the country, but to at least spark your mind on what are the potential draws, how do you evaluate them, assign a likelihood of it happening, what's the maximum that you think you might need to draw. And so while we've done a very good job of factoring in our usage of it for appropriations, I think the other side of it is potential cash usage for other things, in particular with natural disasters where we just see them occurring more frequently and more severely than they have in the past.
Well, on that, could you maybe, in terms of bringing us back to the rating agency view, how would they view it if, for example, if we dropped below our Moody's level, but it was because a sort of natural disaster, and if it was a temporary drop, not sort of a uncontrollable expenditure drop, and we were to replenish it, I think it'd be helpful to know, like, how would the rating agencies react?
I couldn't tell you definitively. I can speculate on it,
Yeah.
but we can have that conversation when we're setting what our target level is. And it is, some of it of how much risk do we want to take, that if that were to happen, Moody's would view it negatively or not negatively. So I think there's a lot to discuss about fund balance if we really want to have a comprehensive look that feeds into a policy that's reasonable, justifiable, and will look really good to Moody's of we went through this whole exercise and this is the right number for us and our conditions.
So set our expectations. the timeline that Jim initially proposed, you said would be aggressive. When realistically could we be ready to have that discussion?
I could see us having conversations over the next couple months and maybe finalizing it November.
That seems like a multiple meeting
Yes.
conversation.
I think, you know,
Right.
we kind of take a first
Three-
pass
two,
at it. What
three
else do we want to
meetings
think
at a
about
minimum.
it?
Right.
Come back, here's where we are. Is there anything else that
And
we
let's,
think
yeah,
we're
let's
missing?
make sure that we set it no later than whatever, November.
Right.
Something
You know,
like
I think by
that.
the end of the calendar year, because as Kate and Board of Selectmen are putting together their
Yes.
budget, they can,
They
you
have
know,
that.
rely on, well, we've always funded from capital, or for capital or something like that. And if this number comes out that we're not gonna be able to do that, I think we need to know that going into the
Yeah.
budget.
But I think-
I don't expect it'll come out that way, but
I think, isn't the broader question there whether or not, like this year, we would use more of, if we deem there to be excess fund balance, to kind of, to lower taxes like we did last year, right? I don't know that we're gonna budget to draw down. I don't know that we want departments kind of
no,
budget.
departments wouldn't, but I
Yeah.
think that because we have done that, this is another conversation that I think we have to have, is the Board of Selectmen budget, when they submit it, doesn't assume any contribution from fund balance to offset capital. So when we talk about, well, what would the potential
This year's
tax
did-
increase
This year's
be?
did.
Not
this-
when Board is, only in bonding. Only the $1
Okay,
million.
That's not my recollection, go ahead.
So it,
It took
it
money out of
sends-
ARPA, they moved things to
Yes,
ARPA,
ARPA
they
we-
did not to general
That's not-
fund.
we
Okay.
did flag some
All
things
right.
for ARPA, but not an assumed fund balance contribution to fund general capital. And so it sends a message of, oh my God, taxes are gonna be so high. But we know that once it gets to Board of Finance, you're gonna look at it, and if your policy is such that there's room there, there will be some contribution to cover capital, which then brings down the mill rate.
Well,
So,
in all honesty, I don't want them to be budgeting on the anticipation that we're gonna do that. I want
then
them to-
I
want
think
them
we
to
need
budget
to.
gross.
Then I think that at maybe the town administrator and board of selectmen level, there has to be a change in the messaging, because it's an artificial, this is what the tax increase is at this point. So I think first, it's the fund balance policy. We find out, you know, is 12% still the right number? Is it some other number? Where are we in relation to that? And then I do think that that flows into some decisions that the town administrator and the board of selectmen do make.
But I think it is a sort of a fundamental question, is the Board of Selectmen developing its budget to determine these are the operating, on the operating side, these are the operating
They are.
expenses to deliver the necessary resources.
They absolutely are.
And we're
And
doing it the
so
most efficient manner, and
I
then,
think that maybe we recast the way that we think about this, and we don't even talk about taxes at the Board of Select, before the Board of Finance is working on their budget. I think we can talk about percent increase in overall spending. But I think maybe we need to steer clear of what does this mean for taxes, because the whole picture isn't there until Board of Finance does their work. So maybe that's the change in.
So back
Yes,
to
that's the right
agenda
way to do
review.
it.
So I think what you're suggesting is that next meeting, we start,
starts a discussion of the
Start this
fund, of the
conversation.
fund balance policy or guidelines,
Yep.
right? I think
but
that's.
it's a multiple meeting
That's,
conversation.
I feel like that's one item.
Yep.
I think the second item, and David hit on it a little bit, that I'd like to, Jen, I started, and I think maybe you and Kate have kind of added to a little bit, but John and I discussed creating or finishing this spreadsheet that we put together that tracks all of these sort of outstanding or being discussed capital projects. Pear Tree Point, what's going on with Great Island, some of the sewage drainage projects that are being contemplated and so forth. The fire trucks that we know that are coming up in the next few years. And I think the idea would be to identify some capital projects that are, I guess, to list out projects that have been either identified or like Pear Tree Point here that are being discussed, actively being discussed by us, so that we have just a totality of what's being discussed, so we can begin to think about what is that doing to bonding, This year, next year, the year after?
5 to 7 to 10-year forward look on approved capital projects, pending capital projects, and maybe possible capital projects, right?
And
Something like that. And then schedule, and then, so identify them.
Yeah.
And then maybe take a stab at, maybe to what David's point is, like, how do we want to stagger this so that we are not funding too much in any given year, or we decide to fund it and we can bond it, whatever decision, but it's a decision tool.
Yeah, 10 years, I think, might be hard to start. I know both the Board of Ed and the Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen
whatever it
kind of
is.
put together a 5-year, right?
Yeah, we have budget plus 5.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
do the 5.
So you're gonna see a first pass of that with an agenda item that's gonna come to you in August for the Gorham's Pond Dam. And so Kate and I started talking about the first pass on that. I think you can review it, tell us what works or doesn't work, we'll tweak it for the next time it comes before you. But you'll have the first pass on that schedule in August.
Is it almost, I thought we saw something where it's like, what's rolling off and what's rolling, like, we're gonna go to 2030, it sounds like, right?
Mhm.
All the items potentially would be capital projects, but don't we have stuff rolling off?
Well, I think we have debt service, right? I think that's
Right.
what we talked about maybe as a, like, below the line in this
Kind of a running, what do you
spreadsheet.
expect debt service is
Okay, so
gonna
you're gonna
look like.
drop it, okay.
So it's like, this is how our debt service trails off, and then in, let's just say 25, or fiscal 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, if these projects were to be bonded.
Right, I think it's all.
That's how,
I think they're all in one spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah, and just an
Kinda like
assumption
Dan's
of we
idea.
bond 1 year after the actual expenditure or something
Yeah.
like, there's gonna be a lot of assumptions.
I'll leave it to you, I'm sure you guys will show.
and I think we discussed,
on
and
that.
hopefully you guys will agree, I think maybe the frequency by which we update this is not on a daily, weekly,
As
quarterly.
necess-
This is something like we would
Yeah.
sort of revisit each year in connection with going into budget cycles and or any other large expenditures we have to make.
I would say
decisions
as
on.
necessary, because there might be a mid-year project that we need to approve, and we're gonna wanna update this so that we know when to schedule it, kind of a thing. So, but as,
Yeah.
it's not,
Right.
yes, yeah,
Yeah, it's not meant to be updated for like a new police car.
no less than annually.
But even if it's not
and more
updated, it
frequently
will
as
come
needed.
to you when you have
Yeah.
a bonding decision in front
Yes,
of you.
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Exactly. And what was the third?
So then the third one is around bonding, right? So to the point Jen mentioned earlier, as it has historically been now, like the Board of Selectmen or Board of Ed would put a project forward to us, or let's see, if the Board of Ed, it goes to Board of Selectmen and then comes to us, or if the Board of Selectmen just comes directly to us, they can generally Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, have historically either put it to us as a cash expenditure that we would pay for out of sort of fund balance or taxes, or put it forward as a bonding. And so they have to approve it, the Board of Selectmen, when they send it to us, as either they're asking us to approve this expenditure and have it be funded by bonding, or they're just asking us to approve it kind of to be paid for by cash. So do we want to create some type of policy or guideline in terms of, that'll give them some direction so that they know if they're putting something forward to us, does it come in a bond resolution? Does it come in a sort of general fund or just kind of cash appropriation? Or do we have them, I guess one of the things we talked about, Jen, is there a way for, them to be able to pass a resolution to put forward to us where we then have the choice to choose how we want to do it?
Yeah, so what we've encountered, and I think we solved it with the fire apparatus, but now we're encountering the same thing with $1 million something. And the Board of Selectmen doesn't want to make the assumption that it's going to be bonded. They want to give you the option. But if you usually want them to approve it so you know that they support doing the project before you take action. And so they right now have to decide, do they want to assume it's bonding or special appropriation? And then it gets to you. If you choose the one that they chose, that's great, it works really well, it continues on the process. If you choose the other one, it has to go back to them because they have to approve both of those, both options, require a Board of Selectmen approval.
So what you're saying, we just provide each board with guidance where we are likely to, not beholden to, but likely
Right.
to bond the project.
Right,
And
and
then-
just set those
Yeah,
guidelines.
that's a paragraph,
Yeah.
right? It's not that difficult.
And then the
because
question would be-
It has certain financial attributes.
To make it more efficient is, if the policy suggest bonding, but we don't want to bond it,
Yeah.
can it be put forward to us? I think, Jen, you're going to check with bond counsel, right? Can it be put forward to us in a way where we can effectively either choose the cash option or choose the bond option, and in choosing one, we sort of terminate the other?
Right, and so we can definitely talk about that, we'll put it on a future agenda. Because I think there's pros and cons to both.
I'd add a fourth thing, which is, I think we should start deliberating in the fall on budget guidance. And that should be a public conversation. So that by the
You guys are reading ahead in
time.
class again.
Pardon?
You're reading ahead in class again, that
Okay.
was the last one that I
So
texted
before,
you.
when you get to the state of the town,
Homework, teacher.
that it's been a publicly debated number, range, whatever it is, that has the full support of the board, some support of the board, but it doesn't get painted as your opinion and no one else's opinion. It's the Board of Finance's guidance, and that it is a public conversation about what that should be.
And I think if we're going to have that discussion, I think the other two discussions that are necessary to have is to understand, if we go through the process of giving guidance, whether the guidance is on operating plus capital, how will the Board of Selectmen use that guidance?
Well,
How will the Board of Ed use that guidance? Because I think if we're producing guidance and no one's going to incorporate any guidance,
well,
I don't know that it's unnecessarily.
yeah, but Jim, honestly, I don't think that's not within our scope. Our scope is to give them guidance. They can choose to ignore it, or they can choose to adopt it, but we can't influence how they react to the guidance we're giving them, other than through the budget
Yeah,
process.
I guess all I'm saying is.
So, but I don't want to get in a position to advise them how they should react to the guidance we're giving them.
No.
I just want to give them guidance that's well thought through.
So guidance itself is relatively new, right? This is the fifth year. The fiscal '25 was the fifth year out of the 19 I've been involved where there's been guidance given, right? John gave it 2 years, and I think I gave it 3 years, or maybe he gave it 3 and I gave it 2. So it's relatively new. So the question is not, by us giving guidance, right, there's a fair amount of time and work that needs to be put into that. The question is to understand how they would use it. And I'm just reflecting on both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen have discussed.
And I'm just expressing, I'm uncomfortable us debating how those boards are going to use it.
No.
I don't think it's our place to debate how those boards are going to use our guidance. I think they will choose to use it or not use it, but we retain the fact that we've articulated guidance that was well thought through when we go through their budgets.
Yeah.
And they will be mindful of that, but I think it's fraught if we start suggesting to them or discussing how they should use that. That's
No,
really.
Yeah, my suggestion, just to make sure everyone's clear in the public, the suggestion was to speak to those boards and ask them, not tell them, ask them, how might you use guidance if our board takes the time to go through and develop guidance around it? So if they don't
I
want to
don't,
incorporate guidance.
I don't think, listen, if I was sitting on one of those boards, I would say, talk to you in March. Because we're going to do our job is to do what's best for the town and the schools, and it's not to satisfy your board's determination of what guidance is. And maybe they'll meet and maybe they won't. We'll have that conversation when we talk about the budget. So I don't think it would be productive to ask them how they're going to react to the guidance we give them.
I don't mean react, because we'd be giving the guidance before the budgets are created. So my question would be, if we gave a guidance of X, Is that something, for example, like a Board of Ed might say, well, the Board of Finance gave a guidance of this, so we're going to give our department heads and our staff that type of guidance? Just trying to understand how another board might use our guidance. Or maybe they won't use it at all.
And I would, if I was the chair of that board, I'm not going to defer to the Board of Finance with respect to my budget process. I'm gonna run my budget process independent of the Board of Finance. So we're going back and forth on this, but
Okay.
I'm a little bit uncomfortable
They could do
going
that.
there.
They could do that, but they just know that our guidance is X. And
That's
all.
exactly right.
That-
And what they tell you in a conversation might be very different than what actually comes to us in a budget when they're through.
And 8 months from now, nobody should be shocked if you're asking for 9 and it comes down to 3.
That's,
And that's all.
And
I
just
mean, the less I think we.
say it's 4%. Model your budget for a 4% increase.
Right.
and if they
That's
model
it.
it for a 6.5% increase, know that
Well,
that's,
yeah, you already,
Yeah, then
you already set an upper limit. It's 4%. You come in over that, unless there are
Well-
extraordinary circumstances.
well, unless there's a convincing case. I don't even know if there's an
Yeah.
extraordinary
Well-
circumstances, but if
Well,
there's.
that's
if-
what what I
Exactly,
meant.
so it's budget guidance, it's not budget guardrail.
I don't know if they'll, to Jim's point a little bit, I don't know if it'll be, I hate to use the word dictated down to department heads, but just know that we're looking for X.
Yes.
Please consider that largely when you're doing your
And I-
budget, because we're gonna have these negotiations in March and April.
Yeah, put it
Don't
out
be-
far
and I
enough
don't
ahead
wanna
of time so it's
have anybody
incorporated
disappointed.
into their first pass.
And
Yeah.
I think I think the thing we owe those boards is maybe a little bit more robust discussion of what that guidance is before it's delivered. But then they can choose to ignore it
right.
at their peril.
What
That's
it
exactly-
is and how it was prepared
Yeah.
and the elements, the variables that we looked at. You know, so it's a little more transparent to them, right?
Yeah.
And
Well-
they may still not like it just as much as before, right? They may not like the number, but at least they'll know how it was developed.
And my only ask is, if we're gonna have that discussion, part of that discussion should be whether this board believes that providing guidance, since again, it's a relatively new thing, whether providing that guidance at that point in time, whether we think that's valuable to the process.
I agree with that.
Agreed.
Does the process add value or not?
Yeah, or does it add confusion or so forth, you know?
And we should define what transparency means. You know, what type of detail do you need? Because in their minds, they may be giving you enough, but we should communicate what would satisfy our board in terms of transparency.
In terms of within their budget?
Oh, yeah,
or-
I mean, I come forward with a special ed budget. You don't want to know that Jim Palin has an outplaced kid for $200,000. You don't want to get down to that level of detail. But what have been the parameters on ECR for the last few years? What does it look like? How many PPTs do you have which
Got it.
give rise to the IEPs, which are contractual? That's the problem. You get hit with these unforeseen, high-cost individuals.
So I think, Paul, what you're saying is like, if we decide to do budget, to provide the budget guidance, we should determine, are there a certain data that we want from each of these two respective boards in order for us to incorporate,
To make a good decision.
to make it, got it.
And,
Prior to setting the
yeah,
guidance.
and how much is digging too deep, both for them and for us?
So what I'm hearing is we should kind of have a good thought about whether we think it's helpful to give guidance. If we're going to give guidance, we should think about, to Paul's point, are there certain data that we want to ask the Board of Ed or the Board of Selectmen to give us in order to help us create that guidance, or that might affect the guidance? Look at the capital, and then sort of, roll that out. So we should have that all done by September.
That needs, that all needs to be done by the state of the town.
Well,
Right.
so.
Maybe a little before that.
Yeah, so the issue is, just on timing here, is that, for instance, like the Board of Ed budget is completed that first I think that first Friday in December, and so it's at the printer. When I'm, or whoever's going to be chair is at the, is speaking in town hall at the state of the town. So that's already printed and sitting in the closet. So I think to make it be effective, we really need to probably be
Needs to be
doing it
in
in
advance.
Probably start in.
in an
October.
They'll be
October,
starting
November.
their budget probably in October.
October.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Anything else people thinking about in the agenda review, or have we filled up our next 4 agendas already?
We filled up our next regular meetings and 2 more special meetings that we're gonna have in addition in order to discuss all these things.
Well, maybe I'll reach out to a few of you guys in terms of leading us on a few of these different topics. Maybe we can create just some bullet points, just so that when we get here, we've already kind of pre-thought about, some of this stuff.
That's a great idea.
So,
Right.
okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you guys all. Very good ideas. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.